Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. When we left off with this MGB, we had just finished an oil change. So now we're going to do the gearbox. This gearbox happens to be an overdrive, so I'll show you how to do that. It's an LH one specifically. The D-type's not much different in terms of changing it. I'll kind of explain that. But anyway, it's basically the same. There's just one added step if you've got an overdrive. So if you've got a standard gearbox, just ignore that step. But if you have an overdrive, you'll want to see this because it's going to be important if you're going to change the fluid. So to start with, we want to get our drain pan. If you don't have a lift, again, you want to make sure that you're jacked it up. Use jack stands, make sure that it's secure. And on any car, I don't care which one it is, the step that you have to do first is make sure that you locate the fill plug, that you can reach it, and that it's loose so that you have a means to fill it. Otherwise, you could end up with a situation where you take the drain plug out, find out that you either can't reach or can't move the fill plug, and then you're hosed. You've got to get the car towed to somewhere where they can actually fix it. So always do that first. In case of an MGB, it's a dipstick that's on the top of this gearbox, and for the overdrive, it shares the same fluid, so we don't have to worry about that. But I've already looked at that and made sure that I could find it, so that's important. Okay. Next up is the fill plug, sorry, the drain plug. It actually looks pretty clean. I'm happy to see that. It was low. And I also don't know what type of fluid it is. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, while that's draining, I'll grab this wrench here. Now, D-type overdrive is going to have a series of plugs on the bottom. One of them is a drain plug. Check in your shop manual, it'll have a diagram, but you'll be able to drain it that way. You don't technically have to do it. If you can't get the plugs out, don't worry about it. It's the same fluid again as the gearbox. So especially in a D-type, if you take out the drain plug on the gearbox, you're fine. But since we can access this, I'm going to take this cover off. This is the sump cover for the gearbox. And the reason I'm going to take it off is because underneath this, there is a filter that I'm going to take the opportunity to clean out since I'm underneath the car anyway. A little magnetic tray like this is a great thing to have. And before I get too far, this is just dripping now, so put the drain plug back in. If you need to pay attention to the solenoid in the LH type, it's under this cover. So if it's not switching in and out of overdrive, check the fluid level first, but then the next thing to check will be, is that solenoid working? And if it's not, that's how you access it. Okay, a couple tricks on this. First, soft face hammer. Just see if you can unstick it, and we did. So there we go. And if that had failed, I have a plastic, note the word plastic, pry tool that you could have gone in and grabbed a piece of it and kind of pulled down a bit. And the reason you want plastic is because a lot of parts on these are made of aluminum, and if you use a steel tool, you're going to break something. So don't do that. Just pull the cover down. It's okay to damage a gasket. You can replace that, but the actual piece, you really don't want to scratch that up. Pull that cover down. Okay. Okay, there's some of the innards to the overdrive, and let's peel this apart here. And here is the filter. So what happens is the overdrive works on hydraulic pressure. It pumps it up, and that pressure, based on which way the valve is pointed, which is controlled by the solenoid, depending on which way that valve is pointed, is either just circulating through or it is holding it in a gear using a friction clutch. And so when it's just circulating through, and if the pressure is too high, even if it's engaged, it's dropping back down to this sump and being picked up through this filter. That's what keeps the fluid clean. So that's another potential cause of your overdrive not working properly. So we're going to make sure that this is clean going back in, and we're going to spray out the sump. The sump also has a couple of magnets down there, and that is to trap particles as they're shaved off. It's not really an oil filter, it's just a magnet and the screen is basically all you get with these. So we're going to take this, clean it up, and put it back together. If you ever have to remove this crossbar, I pity you. I had another video where I did engine mounts on an MGB. It is one of the worst jobs that I've had to do with these classic cars, by a long way. That and the heater core in a lot of them, for some reason. It's like they start with the heater core and then they design a car around it. Wonder why this company went out of business. Anyway. Okay, and then before I tighten those up, I'm going to wipe my hands off and check the shop manual to see if there's a torque spec. You should always look. There usually isn't one. There's kind of a standard thing. You can Google it, but there's a standard thing on different bolt sizes for how tight it normally ought to be. But I like to check the shop manual and see if there's something they have, because this is an aluminum plate going into an aluminum housing with steel bolts, and they are fine thread, and it would be very easy to strip it. So if there's a torque spec, you want to use it. I'm going to go and check that before I tighten it. Okay, nothing specific on it, so pretty small bolts, just snug it up. And whether it specifies it or not, anytime you're doing a plate, you try and do like a, you know, like you do with lug nuts, kind of do like a star-ish sort of a pattern. Or start from the center and work your way out. That's pretty common with attaching plates. Something as small, it probably doesn't really matter, but it's a good habit to get into. And it goes without saying, or maybe it doesn't, lock washers on all of those, and replace them. You don't want to reuse lock washers. Okay, make sure I tightened everything. And now we're going up top, we're going to fill it. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to fit the camera in here really easily to show you what I'm doing, but behind the radio, the carpet pulls back. There's this rubber plug which fits in the gearbox tunnel housing, and if you reach down, it's actually going to be a little difficult to see. Come on. If you do that, you will find the fill and the dipstick to measure whether or not it's full. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that. It's easy if you've got a tube that you can kind of put in, and then a pump. So I'm going to grab one of those, but basically you want the tube to fit in that hole, and then just some kind of a pump. You can buy it at any auto parts store, where you just put it into like a quart bottle, and then as you pump down, it's like a soap dispenser. It'll just push fluid into that hole, and that's what you want. Make sure that you check the shop manual. The one that I have says it's 5.5 US pints, and that's what would go in there fluid wise. And so we're going to get that and then check the dipstick. One note on fluid is that you have to use a GL4 fluid. The shop manual for MGBs, if you look at the original shop manual anyway, it says to use the same 2050 engine oil that you would put up front. You can, you're not going to hurt anything, but gear oil has different properties that engine oil just doesn't. Engine oil is formulated so that it can clear off combustion products. There are no combustion products inside of a gearbox. So unless you're sharing the gearbox oil like you are in a classic Mini, I like to use actual gear oil. You just have to make sure that you're not using a GL5 fluid. It can damage the synchros, it could be too slippery for the overdrive. So there's some fluids that you don't want to use, but GL4 fluid is just fine. You will not harm the overdrive using it. I personally like red line fluids, so MT90, MTL in some cars, depends on which one you're using. One of those is suitable for pretty much any classic British sports car. It's going to be fine. You're not going to hurt anything. You might even notice smoother shifts. It'll operate better. So just do some research, figure out what fluid you're going to be comfortable with, but then you want to pump it in through that hole that we've just opened up. We're going to check the dipstick, and then we're done with our gearbox fluid change. Okay, and you'll want to check the fluid, and you'll want to check the fluid a couple of times too, because what's just happened is it's gone down to the middle of the mark instead of the all the way full mark. And that's because the fluid is shared between the gearbox and the overdrive. So you can fill the gearbox, it's going to shift over to the overdrive, but it's going to happen. It's going to take a little bit of time. So keep checking, top it off again, check, top it off. Should be about 5.5 pints anyway for this transmission. And yeah, eventually you'll get there. Okay guys, I'm just taking you for a bit of a closer look down here. That is the hole in question. See, here's the radio, center console, passenger footwell, and that, or I should say the right hand side's footwell to be more specific. That is the hole, and it's a little bit tough to reach your fingers down in there, but once you do, come on, that's where you see the dipstick. And you could check the fluid level, and yeah, see, look at that, it's already a little bit lower than where it was. So just wanted to give you an idea of where that is. You could do it with a mirror, you could do it by feel too. You just kind of want to make sure that you clean up the excess gunk. You don't want anything to fall in there. So just giving you an idea of what that looks like here. And guys, that's all there is to it. You just check the dipstick a few more times. I'd suggest go for a drive right away. Just make sure that it's topped off. Check the dipstick maybe a half hour later. You don't even need that long, but basically give it enough time so that the fluid is draining from the gearbox to the transmission. Go for a drive, and then when you get back, make sure that there's no puddles underneath. Check the fluid level again. That way you're ruling out any major leaks. And you're good to go. Just the key to it all, well, not really the key, but an important factor, just make sure you're using the right fluid, and a GL4 is what you want. So that's basically all I've got for you this week. We're going to tackle the differential next, and just change the fluid in the rear end, and then keep on our laundry list of stuff for the car. So have a good day, guys. If you've got any questions, post them in the comments below. Otherwise, like, comment, subscribe. That really does help the channel, and thanks a lot. I'll see you soon.